Hi everyone, my name is Violet Reed. I am the beekeeper at the Mahwah Environmental Volunteers Organization, or MEVO, and today I'm here to talk to you about all things the honeybee, discuss why the honeybee is such an amazing insect. We're going to talk about what goes on in a beehive, how do I take care of bees, and what are some problems facing our bees today, and how can we help them. So first comes first, I want to show you a picture of a typical bee, honeybee, that you may see flying around in different flowers from early spring all the way to the fall. And if you haven't seen a honeybee before, no worries. That's why we're here today. So let's look at some photos. Okay, so here's a honeybee. Honeybees are typically girls or females, and we're going to talk about that. And you can tell that it's a honeybee. She has a fuzzy middle, she has black and yellow stripes, and you may know about yellow jackets or wasps, and one way to tell the difference between yellow jackets and wasps is that they are a brighter yellow and they don't have any fuzz on them. So honeybees are a little fuzzy, their yellow is not as bright, and you're going to see them on the yellow forsythia bushes that may be near a house. You're going to see them on any trees that are blooming in your yard. If your parents and you grow veggies at your house, you're going to see them there, or in any flower gardens you have. And this honeybee right here is called a worker bee. And worker bees do just like what they sound like. They are going in the hive and doing most of the work in the hive. So in every beehive, there are around anywhere from 40 to 60,000 bees in the middle of the summertime. So that's a lot of bees. And that means that there's a lot of jobs that need to be done. And most of the hive, I would say, if you had 40,000 bees, at least 39,000 are going to be worker bees, and they're doing everything from feeding the baby bees to looking after them, those are the nurse bees, to cleaning the hive, those are usually called house bees. Sometimes they're guarding the hive. And it's important that there's all these different roles in a beehive because there's a lot of different tasks to get done. So just like in your house, your parents ask you to do chores, you and your siblings and your parents are all doing different things to help keep your house running and to keep it clean and to cook dinner and maybe feed your dog or your cat. So worker bees are really busy all day doing chores. And they also have a really another important task, and that task is foraging. So when you are outside and you say, oh my goodness, there's a bee, or you see bees in your garden, you're probably seeing forager bees. And forager bees are kind of worker bees. So they look just like this. And they're older bees, so they're a little bit more experienced. They've already done the job of being a house bee or a nurse bee, and now they're going out into the world and they're looking for pollen and nectar. So it's really important that we have forager bees because the forager bees help to feed the hive. So they go out and they find pollen, and pollen is that yellow stuff you see in the middle of plants that maybe gives you allergies and makes your nose itchy in the spring. And then they also get nectar, which is the liquid source of minerals and sugars that are also stored in the middle of the plant. So worker bees will go out from flower to flower. They're going to drink up the nectar and fill their bellies with it. And then they're also going to get pollen, and they're going to stick the pollen onto their legs in what we call pollen pockets. So I'm going to show you a photo. Let me find the right one. Here's a good photo. So our foragers are going out, they're going into the middle of the flower, they're getting the pollen, that yellow stuff we see, and on each of their legs there's a little bit of like hair that's kind of like Velcro, and we call that a pollen pocket. And the pollen sticks right to their legs, and they keep it on their legs. They go from flower to flower, they go to a few, and then they go back to their hive and they say, hey everyone, here's some pollen, and the other bees say great, and they put their pollen into cells. So there's cells in a bee frame, and then they feed that pollen back to themselves, to the new baby bees, to the queen. And pollen provides protein for the bees. So just like when you eat meat or you have an egg for breakfast, you're getting protein, it helps you feel full and strong. That's what pollen does for the bees. Bees also, like I said, they get nectar. So they get nectar for their sugars and for their minerals. So in the morning you may be taking vitamins, maybe you have a glass of orange juice, and those things make you feel energized and strong. that's what nectar is doing for the bees. So to review, worker bees are helping to clean the hive, they're helping to take care of baby bees, they are foraging, they're getting pollen and nectar. And I bet some of you are familiar with something else I want to talk about with worker bees. They're doing something called pollination. And pollination is the reason why honeybees are so special. So we need pollination to happen in order for our food to grow. And what pollination is when bees go from flower to flower, tree to tree, maybe veggie plant to veggie plant, and they're picking up pollen from each of those plants, and then they're placing a little bit of that pollen from other plants into the middle of the other plants they visit. And by sharing the pollen from other plants with the plants around them, they're doing something called pollination. And that allows the plants to grow. It allows them to produce the fruits that we like to eat and the veggies. So if you like apples, if you like to eat almonds, if you like melons, if you like peaches, those are all things in plants and fruits and veggies that bees help to pollinate. And something really crazy is that every third bite of food you eat probably came from the fact that honeybees were pollinating it. So if we didn't have honeybees, we wouldn't have apples, we wouldn't have almonds, we wouldn't have peaches. Your favorite fruit or your favorite veggie probably wouldn't be around if we didn't have honeybees. So they are an amazing pollinator. And honeybees aren't the only pollinators. Other pollinators include hummingbirds, wasps. I saw flies pollinating little white flowers the other day. It was pretty incredible. But that is one of the crucial roles that the honeybee plays. And we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that the honeybee populations are doing good right now, and how can we help them, and how can we provide more food for them so they feel encouraged to keep on going and pollinating the foods we love to eat. Okay, so we have worker bees in our hive, but there's also other types of bees. So to review, in most hives, the majority of your bees are going to be worker bees. But what about the other bees? And they're usually female. The other bees in the hive include a type of bee called a drone, and drones are honeybees, but they're a little bit different than worker bees. Worker bees can sting, drones can't. They have no stingers, so you could pick up a drone and he would crawl around your hand all day and would not sting you. Drones are the male bees of the hive. There's a few hundred per each hive, and their job is to mate with the queen so that she lays more eggs and that she produces more worker bees who go out and pollinate, who help to produce honey for us. And no one really knows what else drones do besides mate with the queen, but I think, and some other scientists and beekeepers think, the drones are like the messengers or the mailmen of the hive. So they'll go around from their hive to their hive next door to a hive down the road, and they're going to talk to the bees and deliver news for them and tell them what's going on in their hive, what diseases or difficulties they may be facing. And that is something that I think is really important, because the honeybees need to be in communication with each other. They're all sharing a common goal of getting food for their hives, of pollinating, of staying alive, of being healthy. And the drones are like those messengers. They're like the mailman. They're going around. They're telling about different conditions and giving different news. And so the drones are hatched in the springtime, and then they live all the way through the fall, and they get kicked out of the hive in late fall. Because the thing about drones is that they don't do any chores in the hive. They don't get food. They don't go forage. They don't clean. So the worker bees decide that during the winter time, when there's not a lot of food, it's best that there's no drones in the hive because they're not contributing. So the drones get kicked out in the fall, and then more are hatched in the springtime. So those are our drones. And then finally, I bet some of you are familiar with the queen bee. So here's a queen bee. She has a long abdomen. She's usually a bit bigger than other worker bees. And her job, and her only job, is to lay eggs in the hive to produce more bees. And the worker bee does not go out and forage. She does not do any cleaning. She has an entourage, or a group of bees who follow her around and feed her and make sure she's doing okay, and helping her out if she needs anything. And her only job is to lay eggs all day, and queens can live up to 5 years. Worker bees and drones, usually only live anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the season. But a queen can live for 5 years, and she is the most important bee of the hive because she helps to unify the hive. She releases chemicals called pheromones, and that's how the whole hive communicates. So if the queen is a little bit angry or annoyed, the hive is going to be a little bit angry or annoyed. If the queen is feeling scared, the hive is going to feel a little bit scared. So she helps to tell the hive how to act in different situations. So she's a really important part of the hive. So something else I want to talk about is that honeybees aren't the only pollinators. We have a few different types of pollinators. So I want to go through them and talk about the differences. So here's a wasp, and a wasp is a pollinator, believe it or not. Here is a yellow jacket. I bet you've all seen yellow jackets. Yellow jackets often come out in the fall and late summer. Here is a native bee. So these are bees that don't live in hives. They normally live on their own, but they are also pollinators. And here's another kind of bee, or maybe a yellow jacket, I'm not quite sure. But why are these pollinators different from honeybees? So first off, honeybees often live in hives, or they always live in hives. They produce a lot of honey. They make more honey than they could ever eat. So that's why we're able to enjoy honey in the supermarket. That's why beekeepers often enjoy keeping bees, because they can harvest honey at the end of a warm season, so in the fall. And another difference is that honeybees, if they sting you, they're going to die. So honeybees can only sting once, and they sting if they absolutely think that their life is in danger and the hive's life is in danger. So honeybees often are not stinging you because they're afraid for their life. They're stinging you because they're afraid of the well-being of the hive. Maybe they think that you're a big animal who's gonna try to come in and eat the larvae, which will become baby bees, or the honey of the hive. Maybe they just think that you are someone who does not have good intentions for the hive and might destroy or damage something. So honeybees will only sting once, and that's if they feel like their life is in danger. So I was beekeeping before, and I wasn't as gentle as I should have been, and so some bees got a little alarmed and stung me, and I'm okay, but unfortunately those bees died. Yellow jackets and wasps and other bees, they can sting as many times as they want. So that's why maybe when you think of yellow jackets or hornets or wasps, you get a little bit worried because their stings hurt really bad and they can come at you more than once. Bumblebees and a lot of native bees, they don't sting. They actually bite. So they're not injecting any venom into you, they're just biting you, and they can also do that many, many times. And pollinating insects like honeybees and bumblebees and wasps and hornets, most of them do produce a little bit of honey, but only enough for them, not enough for us. Honeybees, like I mentioned, bring in a lot of honey. Sometimes a beekeeper can get up to 100 pounds of honey from their hive and still leave many, many pounds of honey on the hive so the bees can eat that in the winter. Honeybees bring in honey by going out and foraging, like we talked about, and getting that substance we talked about called nectar, that liquidy substance that's full of sugars and minerals. And what they do is they fill their stomach up with nectar, they bring it back to the hive, they store it in a cell or in a comb in their frame, and then they do something crazy. They regurgitate that nectar and then they take it back in. They regurgitate that nectar and they take it back in. And bees, all while that's happening, other bees in the hive are fanning that nectar so that the water content, the water from it evaporates, so it leaves the honey. And that's how that liquidy nectar becomes that sweet, rich honey that we love in our tea or on toast. Honey is quite literally bee throw up. So next time you're eating honey, maybe think about that, maybe don't if it makes your tummy feel a little funky. But when the bees are taking in that honey and throwing it up, taking it and throwing it up, they're adding in really beneficial things into the honey called enzymes, and enzymes are helping us to break down the honey. It's making the honey do really great things for our digestive system. So honey is not only a tasty food source, it's also a bit of a medicine for us. Okay, so we talked about the different types of bees. We talked about bees or pollinators that are different than honeybees, but are also helping to make our plants produce fruits and veggies and grow. So now I want to talk about what's going on in the beehive, where are the bees living, and what am I doing to take care of them. So I'm going to turn around the camera and we're going to check that out. Okay, so behind me there is a beehive, and I don't have any bees in here because I want to be able to get really close and show you what's going on. But I want to talk about where the bees are living, how do they organize themselves in a hive, and how do I take care of them. So in every beehive, and in most beehives, you're going to see them in these boxes, and this is called a Langstroth Hive. So there's a lot of different types of beehives and equipment that beekeepers like to use, but we like to use the Langstroth Hive. And in every hive, most Langstroth hives, you're going to see a few different things. You're going to see these boxes. These larger, bigger boxes are called deeps, and then these smaller, shallow boxes are called supers. And in every deep, you are going to see 10 frames, and I want to show you what a frame looks like. So here, let me get a little closer. Here is a bee frame, and in every deep you have 10 bee frames, and in the bee frame you're going to see honeycomb. So that's those wax, circular cells of wax that you see in the frame. And in those combs, bees store their honey, they store their nectar, they store their pollen. That's where the queen lays her eggs. That's where the larvae grow up, so eggs turn into larvae. That's where the bees hatch. And it's really an important part of the hive. These combs are made out of wax, and the wax is made by the bees, and it comes off of a gland on their stomach. So little pieces of wax, little platelets of wax come off of the bee's stomach. It's like they're sweating wax, and they move around in this pattern, and they form the beautiful, symmetrical, perfect cells of a bee frame. So you have 10 of those frames in every deep. And in the deep, I like to call it the town center of a hive. So that's where most of your bees are going to be hanging out. That's where the queen is. That's where she's laying her eggs for the most part. That's where the worker bees and the foragers are bringing their pollen and a lot of their nectar. And it's really the city center, the town center of the hive. Then I want to talk about the supers. So the supers look really similar to the deeps. And you may be wondering, what's the difference? So supers have slightly shallower frames, so they're a little bit shorter. And the queen generally doesn't hang out in the supers. She likes to stay in the deeps. And in the supers, you're not going to see really any eggs being laid. The queen really won't be there. Sometimes there's less bees, and that's where the bees store their nectar and turn it into honey that we can take and harvest. So when I, as a beekeeper, decide, okay, I think the bees gave me extra honey, it's time to harvest the honey, I'm not going to take from the deeps, because that's the honey the bees are going to take for themselves for the winter. The deep is like where they're storing their food, like the pantry. So if you have cabinets or a pantry in your house where you store pasta and pasta sauce and cans and beans and veggies, that's like what the deeps are for the bees. They're storing their pollen there, and they're storing their honey that they need to eat for the winter. But as we go up into the supers, the bees are telling me, okay, Beekeeper Violet, we have some extra honey for you. You can take from there, but please don't take from our deeps. So in every hive, I usually have 2 deeps, and I have about 3 supers, sometimes more. And during the summer, I've had hives that have had up to 15 supers. So the hive was almost twice my size. And I was able to take a lot of honey from there. And sometimes I like to keep a super or 2 extra on the hive in the winter, just in case the bees are extra hungry and they need a little extra food. And just like in the deeps, I have 10 frames in every super. And now I want to show you a honey frame. And this is really exciting, so I'm happy I have it to show to you guys. So here is a frame of honey. So check it out. So in all those combs, what you're seeing is you're seeing honey. You are seeing what the bees decided to turn into honey from nectar. And what they did is they filled up these cells, these wax cells, with nectar, or what they made into honey, and then they cap it with a little wax so they can preserve it. And when I, as a beekeeper, decide I want to harvest it, all I do is just slightly scrape off that wax, and then I spin it in this big machine called an extractor, and the honey comes out of the extractor, and I put it into jars, and that's it. That's all you need. I don't add anything to the honey. I don't do anything to it. All I do is spin the honey in a machine out of the cells, and I have delicious honey that the bees made for us to enjoy. And it's really quite amazing that they're able to do that. It's such a gift. So we talked about the supers, we talked about the deeps, and in every single hive I also have a few other things going on. So it's a little hard to see, but the deeps and supers are resting on a board called the bottom board, and that's just so the bees aren't directly on the ground. They have a little space between them and the ground. They're protected from maybe the ground when it's a little bit chilly, and it just helps to keep the hive a little bit more orderly. Then I open up the hive, so I'm getting ready to open up the hive, I use something called a smoker. So here's a smoker, and you can see a little smoke coming out of it. So when I want to go into a hive, I use a little bit of smoke. And why do I do that? I use smoke because it helps to calm the bees down. Because sometimes when someone or a beekeeper goes in to open up the hive, the bees get a little alarmed. It's like if you were at home and someone just came into your house and started to take your stuff. And so when I open up the beehive, I want the bees to know, hey, I'm not here to hurt you. Sometimes I'm there to give them food. Sometimes I'm there to check and make sure that they're doing all right and that they're healthy. And I don't want them to be scared. So what the smoke does is it makes them a little sleepy. It makes them a little bit confused, and it also makes them think that maybe their hive is on fire and that they need to hurry up and get all their stuff out before they leave. So they might turn into themselves. They might start eating all their honey, collecting all their pollen, and they may be preparing to get ready to leave the hive because they think their hive is on fire since I'm giving them a little puff of this smoke. But the smoke will calm the bees for about 15 minutes, and they normally don't leave the hive. They'll stick around because they're busy getting ready to leave. And it allows me to go into the hive without getting stung, without stressing out the bees, and sometimes it means I don't even have to wear a bee suit because they're so calm and relaxed. So when I get ready to open a hive, I say, okay, hello bees, I'm here, and I tell them that by puffing some smoke into their entrance. So they have an entrance on the bottom. So I give a little puff there. And I'll show you if you can see. So here's the entrance. And then at the beginning of every hive at the top, there's also an entrance. So I'm going to give them a little puff right there. And then I use something called a hive tool. So a hive tool is just a way for me to open up the hive and move around equipment. Bees will seal the hive with their own glue that they make called propolis. And propolis is often a mixture of different tree saps that they find in the area, and they use that to waterproof their hive, and they also use it to seal it up so it's tight against predators and it's a little hard to get in. So I smoke my hive, I use my hive tool, I open up what's called the outer cover, and here it is. This helps to protect the hive from rain or the elements. I open that up, and then I give my bees a little bit more smoke, so I give them a bit more puff to let the bees in the top know, hey, I'm here. So I give them a little puff. And then we have the inner cover. And the inner cover is just another layer of protection for the bees. And it also has a little notch right here. And that allows the bees to go in and out of the hive. Okay, so we talked about different parts of the beehive. We talked about what's going on in the beehive. Now I want to talk about some issues facing the bees and how we can help. So right now in the United States, in New Jersey, across the world, our bees are having a hard time, and there's a few different things that are making them a bit sick and a bit weak. Number one, they have something called the Varroa Mite. So it is a parasite that is a tiny little bug, little mite, and it sticks on their back. And if you had a mite on your back, imagine it being about the size of a frying pan. So imagine you had a bug the size of a frying pan on your back. That's like what the Varroa Mite is for the bee. And it's slowly sucking the juices out of the bee. So the bee is still alive with the mite on it, but the mite is slowly taking the energy and the juices and the life force away from the bee. So it makes them really weak. And every beehive around the world, except for hives in Australia, have Varroa Mites. So as a beekeeper, I do treat for it. I give them a treatment called formic acid, and it doesn't kill the bees, but it kills the mites. But still, it doesn't kill every mite. And imagine if you had a big bug on your back sucking the life out of you, you'd be a bit tired a week too. So that's one thing that's weakening our hives and sometimes killing them. Another thing is that there's not always a lot of flowers around. There's a lot of buildings being built and developments, and sometimes they don't plant gardens and they aren't making new meadows, or they're not planting plants that honeybees like to pollinate or forage from. And so a lot of times our bees are really hungry. They're hungry for forage, they're hungry for pollen and nectar. And so oftentimes as a beekeeper, I need to feed them sugar water because there's not enough forage for them around. And finally, another thing that's hurting the bees and affecting them are different farmers and different companies and landscaping companies spraying chemicals on the plants. And they're spraying chemicals because they want their plants to be healthy and to be strong. But unfortunately, those chemicals often make the bees really sick. It makes them sick, it makes them a bit confused. They're not sure how to get back to their hive because they're not feeling very well, and they're feeling a little bit muddled in their head. And so oftentimes when bees go out and pollinate flowers and shrubs and veggies that are sprayed with chemicals, they get a little bit sick, they get poisoned, and they can't get back to their hive. Okay, so how can we help the honeybee? What can we do to bolster their populations, to keep them strong? At Mahwah, what we're doing is we're planting a ton of flowers like calendula and chamomile and sunflowers and a bunch of other native wild flowers for the bees to enjoy. So we want to make sure that the bees have food on our property, on our farm, year-round from spring through the fall. And what are some really amazing plants that you can keep around or plant at your house? You can plant a wildflower mix. You can encourage your mom and dad to let the dandelions flower. Bees love dandelions. Dandelions are one of honeybees' favorite foods because they have so much pollen, they have so much nectar, and a lot of people don't like them in their yards. And so they'll mow them, or they'll pull them out, or they'll spray some chemicals so they don't have them anymore. But we need to keep them around for the bees. Another way that we can help the bee population is to not spray chemicals on our yard. So if you are keeping a garden, or your parents have some beautiful flowers or trees or shrubs, you can ask your parents, hey, do we use any chemicals on our garden? And talk to them about it, because maybe those chemicals aren't great for the bees, and there might be another product or another way to keep your plants healthy and strong without spraying them. And finally, another way to help the bee population is to keep bees. Maybe you are interested in learning more about the honeybee and you'd like to keep a hive with your parents. That could be a great way to add some more pollinators into our area, to bolster the population, to support them. But if that's not for you, planting flowers, growing a veggie garden, trying to not spray chemicals on your yard, that is a great way. And even if it's just asking your parents, hey, can we keep our dandelions in our yard? That is one of the #1 ways you can help the bees, because it's providing them with food and with nectar and with pollen. And in the springtime, there's not a lot of food around, and dandelions are one of the first food sources that show up. So those are some of the ways that myself and Mahwah try to help the bees, and that you can as well. So we learned a lot today. We learned about worker bees, we learned about drones, we learned about the queen, we learned about different parts of the hive, we learned about other types of pollinators that aren't honeybees but also help to pollinate our flowers and our fruits and our veggies. We learned about issues facing bees and how we can help them. We learned about honey and how it's made. We learned a lot, and there's so much more to learn about when it comes to bees. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned a little bit. If you're interested in learning more about bees, you can reach out to me at mahwah.org. You and your parents can check it out. And we have more information about bees on our website, and would love to see you come out and learn about our bees by looking at our apiary and coming to visit our apiary with us through one of our workshops. So thank you guys, and I hope you have an amazing day, and be well.